Welcome to the Security Weekly News wrap-up show for the week of 18 September 2022. We've got Bionic Cockroaches, Credential Stuffing, MFA Fatigue, ICS, Magento, which I'll probably call Magneto because it just looks like that to me even though it's spelled Magento, Mobsters, and all the show wrap-ups. Stick around.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News.
Right now, everybody is talking about cryptocurrency, and the cyber criminals are hiding in the conversation. Cyber criminals use social engineering loaded with urgency and fear to successfully prey on your company, your employees, and your customers. Spear phishing is just one of the 13 types of email threats. Barracuda has identified 13 types and shows you how you can protect your company, your customers, and your reputation. Find out about the 13 email threat types and Barracuda email protection by going and getting your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. I'm Doug White from Roger Williams University, which is sadly lacking in an endowed chair for me, but hey, if any of you rich people want to step up, this is the Security Weekly News Wrap-Up Show, episode 241. Yeah, 241 times. How about that? All right, this week on Application Security Weekly, number 212, John and Mike had Sam Plachette, the Director of Engineering at ThreatX, on the show. They were talking about API security, which, of course, is a big deal in current days as well as always, but has been a lot more in the news. They actually talked about effective ways to test code and what AppSec teams should be doing to try to help developers create secure code, because, you know, I mean, this just goes round and round, and it's been a topic ever since I've been involved in this stuff, which is way too long. In the second segment, the AppSec news. On Business Security Weekly, number 277, Matt, Jason, and Tyler had on Paul Baird, the Chief Technical Security Officer for the UK at Qualys. Paul was on talking about a risk-based approach to security, which focused more on the most critical issues, which will actually reduce risk. So, I mean, I like that a lot. I think this is sort of the coming storm of security. Is, you know, obviously we can't solve every single problem, so I think this risk-based approach stuff is probably going to evolve a lot. They talked about how do you monitor the threat landscape, quick responses, metrics, and so forth. So pretty interesting segment to me, as I am quite interested in that area. In the second segment, the leadership and communications news. On Enterprise Security Weekly 289, Adrian Tyler Shields of Katie had on Jonathan Roizen, the CEO at Flow Security. Jonathan was on to talk about data security posture management, which I didn't really know. I had not heard that term when I saw that, but they were talking about what. So if you're interested in that and you don't know what it is either, they were talking about what is data security posture management, and they were particularly talking about how it differs from DLP. So a pretty good introduction to that. In the second segment, the host walked through and in great detail the Uber breach. So a lot of details there about how that breach happened and what was done. So pretty fun if you're interested in such things. In the third segment, the enterprise security news. On Security Weekly News, number 240, Jason talked about a couple in Vietnam that attacked IHG bank with ransomware and then actually used wipers on the bank. And when they got caught, they basically said they were just doing it for fun, you know, sort of that because it's there, Sir Edmund Hillary kind of thing, because it's there, you know, and which is an old, you know, hacking idea of that's, you know, more from my era, was just why not, you know, because I can get away with it, because I could do it. They didn't get away with it. But I mean, you know, people that just took advantage of things and exploited things because they were interested in exploiting things. We also spent some time trying to make up sick rhymes for the family that hacks hotels together, but didn't have much luck with that. But it was sort of a bust. So, you know, Snoop, call me, man. You know, maybe we could use you. On Paul's Security Weekly, number 756, Sinan Aaron, the VP Zero Trust at Barracuda Networks, was on the show. The segment focused on something I wanted to talk more about, too, is an MFA fatigue and authentication attack. That was a big news story this week. A lot of people interested in that because it's not really an exploit as much as it's just a human nature thing, and I'll talk about it a little more on my chunk. In the second segment, the cybersecurity news. So speaking of my thread of the week, my thread of the week is going to be the full circle of human nature in the form of MFA fatigue. So I'll start out confessing to a prank and statute of limitations and all. We once had this person we didn't like very much, and by we I mean me, but there were some other people around, so maybe they didn't like them too. But anyway. We, and by we I mean I, set up a dial-up modem to call that line about 250 times a day at random. I just wrote a script, and I had the modem just dial the number and ring 3 times and hang up. And of course, this was in the before 4 times when they didn't do call tracing. But, later, we saw brute forcing stuff it come about, and that was around even long before the internet. There was the brute forcing idea. But, because most systems didn't have rate limits or any kind of, count of how many attempts or anything else. So you could just become an Uber hacker if you could write a password brute forcing script or get one from somebody. But, I mean, that was, again, it was just this sort of grinded out kind of model of how do you get something you want or annoy somebody till they give in. The equivalent of this, of course, is calling over and over and over again until they give up and let you have what you want at the insurance company or, at United Airlines customer service. But you can certainly count on humans to slowly exploit the exploitable. I mean, without a doubt, that human nature is to grind away until you get what you want. And I mean, and I've started to feel this fatigue effect on my phone since I've been getting so many texts from some politician who's running for county rat catcher who just needs a small sum to utterly and totally defeat his horrible opponent who eats children for breakfast and is probably rabid, maybe also a cannibal. As though a rabid cannibal, I guess if you eat children for breakfast, you're a cannibal by default. It didn't say what kind of children, but that kind of stuff. But I mean, it kind of makes you want to just turn your phone off after like the 23rd text comes in today before breakfast where they're saying that. And I mean, I block these things, but they do get annoying. Robocalls and other such things. Eventually you just answer because you're so sick of seeing that same number pop up over and over and over again. Well, MFA fatigue is kind of the same thing all over again. I mean, basically, since people could either buy, guess, or crack your password, and there's a news story about that, and you use that same password on MrFufu.com that you use on MyBank.com, well, that's credential stuffing made simple, right? That created lots of problems, so of course we introduced MFA. And so multi-factor authentication, which is the kinder, gentler solution that takes you back to an earlier age. Come home to Simple Rick's MFA. No, well, sorry, actually, no, MFA, the cure for everything. And it did work. I mean, don't get me wrong. MFA is necessary, and you need to be doing it. And I mean, the idea is sound, and the recommendations were sound, and we knew all along, and we told you all along that it would not stop break-ins. It would just help, because the tool is only as good as the squeeze. I'm terrible at these. The tool is only good as the squeeze juice. I'm not sure, but I don't know if you use MFA, and you should, but when you get a call, you have to train your users at the same time, right? Because when they get that call asking them to read the MFA code to a guy named Bert with a strange accent who just wants to help, well, I mean, it won't prevent that, right? I mean, MFA is not a panacea. It was never built, at least by me or any people I know, it was never built as a panacea. It was just perceived as a panacea, right? Because a lot of upper management would hear, oh, yeah, it'll solve all your problems. But for some of us, when Bert calls, we just sing French black metal songs until they hang up, which is quite effective. But so Bert has to regroup. So, I mean, some sad fellow make a cup of tea gazing into the distance out a window over a city that looks a lot like Mos Eisley and sighing since that old call-up approach has failed. And now how will little Bert Jr. afford that new MacBook for school? That's just sort of, that's where those guys got to. So instead, Bert Jr. has to make do with a Chromebook and grows up with a dark, burning hatred of the Empire and eventually becomes the head of a little-known sect of Jedis called the Hot Boys, which end up not doing Jedi stuff at all, but do star in some Sith porn in some forgotten corner of the Empire and realize their whole life is a lie. Wait, what the hell were we... Sorry. Sometimes I get a little distracted by myself. But, MFA fatigue. Okay, so back to that. Anyway, so Bert has to take a new approach and decides, well, the old ways are best. So Bert basically realized that if he could just write a script that would push MFA login attempts to people's phones, like, say, 10,000 times, they might either screw up and hit the accept button while they're trying to close all those windows. That was an old tactic with pop-up ads, was, they would try to hide the close button. They would make a button that says close. It actually takes you to ad. All kinds of nasty tricks like that. Or maybe, just maybe, like you pick up the phone that is rung 100 times today and say, leave me alone, or sing French black metal songs, which is kind of cool. But, basically, if they do that, then that login and password combo that they got from the MrFufu.com breach can be used after all. Because if they can get you to give them the MFA code, they get around MFA. And if you hit accept on your MFA authentication, like on Duo, because it just keeps popping up approvals, and you're just trying to close them all and you actually hit it, poof, MFA becomes a non-issue, and they get around it using that, that same old credential stuffing attack. It seems like this ought to be fixable pretty easily. You really just need to take, again, an example from the past and say, how do we stop brute forcing? We put rate limiting on there. We limit how many can happen. Or we, of course, could also say only certain numbers can do this, and we could try to limit it. That may be the solution. It seems like a pretty easy fix. But, maybe they could also apply that to political begging. So, you can block it, but they just keep changing the number. So watch out for this nonsense, and you might want to put out some warnings for your employees, because people are being hit with this heavily right now. And, of course, you need to get out in front of it and make sure your employees understand exactly what's happening and how they can avoid it. For all I know, that modem is still over the ceiling in that dorm trying to dial that number. It's probably just sitting there forever, like, I guess I'll dial again. And it becomes like the cursed dorm room where the phone just rings randomly about 100 times a day. That's the one you get assigned to when you're a freshman, right? And you just walk in and you go, yay, I'm in college. And it's like the phone rings 100 times. Yeah, that kind of stuff. Sure, good luck getting that fixed. And now the news. So speaking of all this, and I put this story first because of that, Okta reported that credential stuffing has worsened in 2022. And they said that they had recorded over 10 billion, with a B, credential stuffing events on their platform in the first 90 days of 2022. And, automated stuff for 10 billion, so what? Go for 20. But this represented about 34% of the overall authentication traffic that they were monitoring. So more than a third of the authentication traffic was credential stuffing attempts. The attacks not only may end up with access to the network just by getting lucky, but it also can create load balancing issues when the sheer volume of attacks escalates, which was what they were showing in this report, that, over time that they really started pounding away. Credential stuffing, if you aren't, I know most of you do, but just for some of our listeners and viewers don't always know all this stuff. Credential stuffing results from you reusing your credentials. So if you use the same login password credentials on multiple sites, it doesn't matter if bank.com is super safe. If you go across the street to MrFufu.com, which I always use as an example of this, and basically they get your credentials from there, then you end up with a credential stuffing attack, and they succeed because you have that same username password. So they just script all this out. Knowledge, password vaulting tools, and MFA are all mitigations which you can use to prevent this from occurring. But you need to ensure that your users understand this kind of common attack. So you might want to put out some verbiage about it and explain the MFA fatigue attack as well. Patch Tuesday at Microsoft released not only a major revamp of Windows 11, but also resulted in some group policy issues on Windows client devices once they have been installed. The issue in particular causes files and shortcuts. So when you're trying to move stuff around using group policy, so this is not like a drag and drop thing, but this is like when you use group policy to move things or change things or add shortcuts. Sometimes the files and shortcuts don't copy, or they end up as empty files, and it causes a big problem. And some of the shortcuts then aren't linked and whatever. So there was a lot of issues with people's group policy scripts going on, or they're not really, well, they're scripts of a sort. Microsoft said, quote, files or shortcuts will not copy to the target drives or end up as 0-byte files when using group policy file operations, end quote. Affected systems include Windows 8.1 up to Windows 11, with the current, and Windows Server SP2 to Windows Server 2022. So basically all, unless you're using some really old stuff, pretty much everything was affected by this, but only for group policy operations. So this did not mean that your drag and drop won't work. It just means when you're trying to manage your organization, which is why I mentioned it here. Microsoft confirmed that a workaround, which was shared by users before they actually acknowledged that this was an issue, they did say that workaround would work, and they shared some other options which are included in the article I attached. So if you're having any kind of issues with this, you use a group policy, you might want to go check this out. The NSA, along with CISA, so that's the NSA is the National Security Administration, secret crypto group in the U.S., and CISA, of course, being the United States cybersecurity arm, have issued guidance on securing operational technology, OT, and industrial control systems, ICS, this week. The advisory has information on steps used, got a lot of details about the steps used by attackers to compromise IT-enabled OT. So, this is when you have devices in your operational technology networks, your factories, that have got network capabilities and can be communicated with. And also ICS the same way. So when people started putting in Bluetooth valve controllers and stuff, instead of sending Luigi down there with a pipe wrench, all of a sudden you've got some issues there. All of that led to much larger attack surfaces in the ICS world over the last few years. I mean, those were always there, but they've really gotten bad about this. There's a lot of threats to that by nation states, and of course, obviously, enemy hostile nation states, whichever side you're on, have been targeting these things extensively. According to the article, the advisory that they issued provides detailed information on how to block threat actors' attacks at every step. So they've really put out a comprehensive document here. I went and looked at it. It looks really nice. They included stuff like attempts to collect intelligence, gain initial access, deployment of malicious tools, and so forth. They go on and provide a list of mitigations as well to try and limit risk from these things. This is an add-on to the 2021 guidance on OT control systems and the 2020 guidance they issued on defense for OT assets. Seems to be a part of an increasing posture of the U.S. government to protect the U.S. critical infrastructure. That full guidance is in the article, so it's well worth your time if you are supporting ICS or OT, or you're just interested in that kind of stuff. There has been a surge in hacking attempts targeting a vulnerability in Magento. I told you I was going to say that. Magento 2. Every time I see that, I think Magneto, is going to come up and take on, good old Magneto and the X-Men. Magento 2, and Magento 2, if you aren't familiar, is an open source e-commerce platform that Adobe owns, and it is used in around 170,000 online shopping sites worldwide. The vulnerability was found and patched in February after it was being exploited in the wild, and it did include a CISA alert urging that you patch this way back in February. But obviously people don't. A proof of concept vulnerability was published days after the CISA alert in February, which suddenly, of course, means that everyone can get in on the fun. And note, I'm not suggesting we not publish these. I think we should definitely publish them. But once, you put it out there and explain how to do it and how it works, pretty much everybody's going to jump in on board. Sansec, who was doing this research, said there are 3 attack variants currently exploiting this vulnerability, which all inject a remote access Trojan on vulnerable endpoints that use Magento 2. There are all the grim details of all 3 attacks that they laid out in the article, but, please patch this up. Come on. I mean, we just keep doing these stories and we keep talking about this, and I understand it's difficult to patch, but this one you need to patch. So if you're using Magento, jump on board. We keep seeing stories about hacking groups acting like corporations, but I could not resist this one. Here they were acting more like the mob. Apparently, a teenager in Florida named Justin, who goes by the name Foreshadow, was working as a holder, which is a term, in a SIM swapping operation. Marco's a button man for the mob. Note to actual mobsters out there who are now already thinking about whacking me, I don't know anything about the mob, except what I learned from Scorsese films and The Sopranos. But I did have dinner next to an apparent godfather once, and I do remember seeing that post headline when Lilo Gambino got assassinated at dinner in New York. But anyway, a holder is a street-level SIM swapper who physically holds hence the name, physically holds and manages all the devices and SIM cards that are being used in SIM swapping scams. There was a widely shared video of this on Telegram and other platforms where Foreshadow, who is the person in question, this teenager, is basically sitting there bloodied with a gun to their head, begging someone named Dan to send $200,000 or they're going to kill me. So no hacking involved. It's just like old-fashioned rubber hose hacking. They got the guy in a room somewhere with a gun to his head, and he's saying, please pay up or they're going to kill me. So this led to all sorts of shenanigans about whether Foreshadow was alive or dead. There was all these rumors that they'd been shot, and that some of the rumors said they were dead. Others said they were not dead. But there was a notice posted on Telegram that said, quote, Foreshadow is not dead. Of course, that means it must be true. And went on and said that Foreshadow was cooperating with the FBI, and I wasn't sure if that was a swatting attack or what, but they said they were cooperating with the FBI due to being kidnapped. And it went on and said, if you have chats with him, clear them. Now, Justin's boss, apparently named Jarek, told Krebs, and so Jarek was interviewed with Krebs, told Krebs that Foreshadow was shot, but it didn't say if they were alive or not, but that they said that kidnapping was retaliation for shortchanging a SIM swapper from Australia. Now, that then turned into Telegram wars, and via Telegram, Gus, who was the Aussie SIM swapper, and Gus confirmed he ordered the attack on Foreshadow because Foreshadow had held back some of the stolen funds, and then went on and said Jarek was next because Jarek had doxed Gus to Krebs. So just now starting to sound like season 3 of The Sopranos, right? Yeah, this is apparently is part of a new wave of violence that is being reported as violence as a service. So there are tons of sites on Telegram and the dark web now that are advertising, we'll perform violence for you. I'm like, okay, this can't be good. But basically, this is being provided for hacking groups to settle scores now because they get frustrated, and the old denial of service attack is just not cutting it when you can send guys out with ball bats. Next thing you know, we'll have to go to the mattresses with Paulie Walnuts and Tommy DeVito. Yeah. Paul released his part 3 of the firmware security realization series that he's been writing at Eclipsium, where he discusses the more common vulnerabilities found on several of his systems, including missing BIOS write protections and so forth. The whole series is really well done. It's worth your time to read. Covers all this firmware stuff in grim detail. It's really fun stuff. Good job, Paul, and check that out. And finally, you want Terminators or ants? Well, this is how you get Terminators or ants. Well, actually not ants, but cockroaches. And well, if you think regular old New York cockroaches are bad and harder to get rid of than your old college buddy who's been living on your futon for 2 years, well, Japanese researchers meaning well, of course. I used to be a real aficionado of like 50s horror movies. There was never a 50s horror movie where, the researchers didn't mean well. They were always, government employees trying to do their best, just, whatever, to defeat communism. I tried this serum on myself kind of stuff. But anyway, Japanese researchers found that they could build cyborg cockroaches. Yeah, let that land for a second. This could be a Pickle Rick kind of thing, right? Literally, it could be a real world Pickle Rick incident. But anyway, the Robo Bug that they developed was put together by Riken Cluster for Pioneering Research, and apparently is targeted at search and rescue missions. Because it makes sense, right? A little teeny robot the size of a cockroach that you could send into rubble or something to try to find stuff out. Not to mention, cockroaches are tough, right? They can survive all kinds of radiation and so forth. So it's well-meaning. They chose not a New York cockroach, even though I personally would recommend them. They chose instead the giant Madagascar hissing cockroach, which those things are just a barrel of laughs. And they've given it a tiny Arduino-based backpack with wires connected to its rear legs and solar power. And the team was able to use this backpack to make the roach run around and go left or right. So, I mean, not a lot there yet. You know, probably not quite on the level of reporting back, but they could at least manipulate it with this little backpack. You know, and it is solar powered, but I think roaches are generally running in dark places. And if you're sending, you know, I wasn't so sure about the solar power thing, but you know, it might be a problem. But at least we will be safe in the daylight when these things rise up, or will we? The end ? Yeah, I love 50s horror movies. Anyway, that's a wrap up for the week of 18 September 2022. I'm Doug White, and I'll see you next week.